Research on spiritual awakening and non-duality is relatively rare, which is why I was so excited when I found this research paper by Gary Tzu and others that looks at the transition of people from separation, from duality, into non-duality. And there is so much in this research paper, so many gold nuggets. I'm not going to have time to cover all of them, but I want to put a link to this article, to this research paper in the description for you to look at yourself. It is full of insight, full of really interesting ways that these researchers chose to investigate non-duality in a scientific paper, in a scientific framework. And weirdly enough, this paper shows up in a journal on mental health addiction, which, in a sense, if you think about it, it sounds a little bit strange. What does non-duality have anything to do with addiction? But if you think about it, addiction is what we're all stuck in. That it is the fundamental grasping for desire, the grasping for gratification, the grasping for safety or comfort, for an identity. And it's so much of what separation is about. It is a grasping for something that we do not have, the union, the non-dual state. And we're looking for that comfort, that appeasement in either a romantic relationship, some kind of success in society, or some kind of alcohol, drugs, caffeine, you name it. So in a sense, addiction is one of the fundamental manifestations of separation. It's one of the ways that we try to fill the void of emptiness inside of us. And that's actually exactly what this paper talks about. So I want to jump right into it. The title, Novice's Transition from Separation to Non-Dual Being, a Transpersonal, Existential, and Phenomenological Analysis. So, I'm going to break down a few of the key points that I found really interesting in this paper. But there are really a lot of ground this paper covers. So, one of the points that this paper makes is that the non-dual state. We used to think that it was fairly rare. In most spiritual and religious traditions, that's how it's pictured. A very rare state that not many people reach, in a generation, much less hundreds of years. But what Gary Tzu and colleagues found was that actually this non-dual state of being is much more common than we first thought. And it could be because, there are more people talking about it and we're paying attention to it more. Or it could be that there is actually a kind of, shift going on where more people have access to this kind of state of being, which is, can be very exciting if that's something that is really happening in the world. And I know that many people believe that it is. One of the things that this paper focuses on, in which I found particularly interesting, is that it focuses on existentialism and existential concerns as almost a kind of necessary step to awakening, to non-dual being. And existentialism, for those who aren't so familiar, is basically these questions about existence, these questions about, death. Why am I conscious? Why am I here? What is my true self? Authenticity, a sense of isolation from the rest of the world, a sense of separateness, and wanting to connect on a deeper level. A sense of meaninglessness and a yearning for purpose, a yearning for deeper meaning in this world. All of these questions are things that in Western philosophy were most directly addressed by the existentialists. Philosophers like Camus, like Nietzsche, like Sartre, like Heidegger, Kierkegaard. These are some of the heavy hitters. When I was in college, I was all over these philosophers, and at a certain point, I kind of lost interest in them. And what this paper says, which I found really interesting, is that a lot of the people that they they spoke to, a lot of these novices, as they call them, not spiritual masters, not fully realized beings or anything like that, but novices, people that are really just in the early stages of coming into awakening. They've at this point they're not just starting meditation. They've had awakenings. They've had moments of non-duality, and are actually in the process of integrating and coming into a way of living in the world from a non-dual state, or at least much more in contact with that non-dual state. So what it says is that these existential concerns all of the people that they spoke to had them at some point. And they were concerned about, they felt separate from the world. They felt, that they either had trauma or were betrayed at a certain point in their past, and they had all of this pain and this struggle, and they were really struggling with, questions of life and death, like what is this world really about? And what this paper says is that existential concerns like these are actually doorways to emptiness. And the original way that people enter into emptiness, if they're not in a kind of monastic spiritual setting where they're being guided by a spiritual teacher or master, usually when we stumble into emptiness for the first time, it's not the kind of, oh my God, wow, this divine nothingness. No, it's this really gut-wrenching, like, devastation of nihilism, really. It seems like there's no purpose to anything. It seems like the whole world is sapped of its color, and there's this grayness to it. And this experience, according to these researchers, in the people they spoke with, is a fairly common thing to happen. And so they're faced with essentially the void. They're faced with the void, the nihilistic emptiness of existence. And then they have to try and figure out a way to deal. And what most people tried to do was they tried to fill the void. They tried to, find ways to make sense of their life, to make meaning. And some of the strategies that they talk about is some people will assume roles in the world. They'll take on different roles. They'll become a good student or a good manager, or they'll take on the role of a husband or a wife, and they'll try all these ways of attaching to a certain identity. This is who I am. These are the universities I went to. These are the things that I've accomplished. And it gives some sense of purpose. It gives some sense of meaning. This is a temporary solution. And really, this is what most people do in the world. They're taking on these different roles, and we define ourselves by them. We become attached to them. Other things that we could do to avoid the void, or try to fill it, rather, is to identify with the other. Identify with a beloved, a romantic partner, or with friends or colleagues, a brotherhood or sisterhood. Trying to identify with a country, trying to identify with a cause. All these, are other valid ways of trying to find meaning in the world. And they work. Sort of. They work up until the fact that you realize that the void is unquenchable. There's nothing that you can throw into it that will fill it. This hole has no bottom. And that's where the real struggle and trouble comes in, is that once these, novices, as they're calling them here, once these, regular people realize that all of their strategies for trying to ignore or avoid the abyss weren't working. Sometimes these strategies also were much more extreme. They were much less healthy, like straight-up addictions to either success or workaholism, drugs or sex or masturbation. These strategies, one by one, all of them, they fail. And interestingly enough, even the pursuit, even the spiritual pursuit, the pursuit of spirituality, the pursuit of different practices, trying to transcend one's life, these researchers also say that there is a point at which even that fails, even that reaches a point of failurehood. And there's this real sense of what they call the seeker's hell, where you've tried everything, not only in regular life maybe, but also what seems like on the spiritual path, and you're going round and round in circles, and you're not getting it. You're not, it still feels like at the bottom of everything, there is this empty void, and there's nothing that can fill it. And this existential plight is only resolved with non-duality. And this is the place where we start to transition from separation, from isolation, to non-separation, to the non-dual state. And so when the seeking, when the filling of the void, when all that starts to break down, either the ego starts to let go and really give up, and it starts to open up, or another real risk is that the ego gives up in a different way, and this is where the risk of suicide becomes very real. It starts to believe that there's no way out, there's nothing that it can do, and so it just ends a person's life out of intent of ironically protecting them from this suffering. But for those that this is a real risk in this journey, in this place, and those that end up when the ego gives up in the first way, in the way that I can't do this anymore, and it just drops away. We have an experience of non-duality. We have a genuine experience of giving up, of surrender, of letting go, and this experience can be just for a moment. The sky clearing, we see the blue sky amidst the storm, and then it can cloud over again. And that moment is usually what is called a spiritual awakening. It is the moment of awakening, the moment when we can really see and experience that non-dual state. And if it is an authentic awakening, if that is a moment of real non-duality, we don't forget it. That is something that stays with us, that insight, that understanding that we are not just ourselves, that we are the universe, that the universe is living through us, coming through us. That is something that we do not forget. What is interesting about this moment of non-duality, according to these researchers in this paper, is that usually it is foreshadowed by early childhood experience. And this is actually something else that I found surprising, but when I reflected on it in my own life, I found that it was true. When I was much younger, when I was, in early, about 10, 11, 12, till 14 or so, I could remember these moments of real stillness, of real clarity, of real silence. And it was remarkable. It was so amazing. It was the reason that I wanted to become an artist, to become a writer, to try and capture these experiences and communicate them to others. That was the whole point of my art originally, and really the point of a lot of art, especially spiritual, religious art, is to try and capture and convey these moments of insight and clarity in a way that is not logical, and in a way that is not just using words or ideas, but communicating something on a much deeper level. So what these researchers are saying is that oftentimes when a person goes through this journey and they have this moment of awakening, there might be something that they recognize about it. Because earlier in their life, they may have had different themes show up that foreshadowed this awakening, that foreshadowed this greater opening or understanding. But something else happens after we have this moment of awakening. And this is something that I speak about in other videos, something that Adyashanti talks about as well. We have this fluctuation that starts to happen. We have this moment of awakening. We're at the top of the mountain. We're at the peak. We can see all around, and we understand. We finally get all the Buddhist koans and all the things that Jesus was talking about, the kingdom of heaven, and all of this non-dual understanding. We just get it. It starts to make sense in a way that it never did before. And then we come back down. We come back down off the mountain. And then we go into this cycle of I've got it, I've lost it. I've got it, I've lost it. And this fluctuation is the ego mind trying to reassert itself. It's trying to come back into relevance. It's trying to show up and really trying to help us in the only way that it knows how, in the ways that it's built up all these protective self-defense strategies over the years. It's still not trusting that this awakened state of being is going to help us survive and live in the world. And in some ways it won't, because that's not what it's about. So in a sense, the ego does have some of its fears are somewhat justified. But some of the ways that this can show up is that we can start to war with ourselves. We can be at war with ourselves. Different people that they spoke to described the kind of moments of freeness, of openness and ease, and then a few minutes or later, their inner critic might come in and say, be realistic, or get back to work. You need to pay rent. You need to do these things. And it'd be, suddenly we contract again, and then they'll find another moment of stillness and openness, and then contract again. And this fluctuation was a common pattern after these people went through an initial awakening, a moment of non-duality. Something else that they noticed is that this contraction would happen usually under pressure or under threat, which makes sense because the ego is trying to protect us. The ego is here to help us navigate the social world and keep us psychologically and emotionally safe, as well as physically safe from attack, from tigers, from famine and floods. So under pressure and under threat, they found that we tend to lose focus. We tend to lose our sense of center, and we revert to old patterns of self-protection, whether at work, with family, in public settings. And so this openness and this freedom are much harder to maintain in those kind of pressured situations. Something else that they noticed was that spiritual bypassing was a strategy that also was prevalent among these people, and honestly, it's prevalent among a lot of spiritual seekers. For those that aren't familiar, spiritual bypassing is a term that is basically, it means to try and go to spiritual insight and transcendence, to avoid our basic problems, to avoid our basic emotional wounds and personality, the shadow aspects of our personality that we reject or deny about ourselves, but are actually not very loving or liked or enlightened or anything like that. But they're really just other forms of self-protection that we have built up over the years. So spiritual bypassing is another thing that contracted people. Is they tried to avoid completing that healing and avoid those personal issues, and instead try and maybe chase or escape to this transcendent non-dual state, which didn't work because, ironically, trying to attain this state, trying too hard to force the awakening to happen or to return to a non-dual state is itself something that prevents it from happening. We overthink it, and as one a person that they interviewed said, I think he put it so well. He said, I tried to outthink it. I tried to make it a big and complex ball that only somebody really smart and narcissistic could figure out. And that's something that I have been guilty of in the past as well, and something that I find that a lot of people that work with me, they're very, very intellectual, very smart, they're very sharp, people that have done a lot of studying, that have done a lot of research into this work, and they beneath that research and that thinking is a hidden striving, a hidden grandiosity of wanting to get it, to wanting to be superior in a way, spiritually superior to those around them. And it's insidious because you don't even really always know or notice that this is one of the driving forces. Now, if that, if you feel a little bit called out by that, it's all right, because ironically, that is the ego trying to get to the state of non-duality, to aggrandize itself, to make itself feel superior. And interestingly enough, this striving is actually part of the fuel that leads to advancement on the path, and ironically leads to the ego's own undoing further down the line. Which is not something that it expects, or rather it thinks it expects it. It thinks that it knows what it's doing, but really the ego is trying to get rid of the other parts of the ego that it doesn't like. The spiritual ego, the enlightened ego, is trying to get rid of all the other parts of the ego that it doesn't like. And what it doesn't realize is that it will have to go as well. So, this is a longer video than I expected, but there's a lot in here. I could go talk about this article for many minutes. So what do we do? How do we help ourselves on the path? So the article talks to a number of novices that, and they talked about the different strategies that worked for them. What helped them on their path to ease into and into non-dual being as a part of their everyday life. One of the things that I think is really useful to talk about is what does it actually feel like or mean to be in a non-dual state? It's hard to express in words, but I found a description here that I thought was really good. It was really good. I think it's it's something that I've returned to a number of times since reading it, and it's talking about what it looks like or feels like to be in presence. So to be in presence, we can, it's talking about sensing it in somebody else, but also relevant to the internal sense as well. We can sense an unpretentiousness, a lucidity, a transparency, joy, and an ease of being. And elsewhere it says, a marveling at the mundane. And I just think that that's such a good description of what it really is about. It's this unpretentiousness, a lucidity, transparency, a joy, and an ease of being. And even mundane things like the falling of the rain or a cup on a table have this marvelous quality to them. And it's in the simplicity that we find the joy. It's in the simplicity that we find the ease and the openness. And ironically, it is exactly the opposite of what that seeker that I was talking about earlier was saying, who was trying to make it into this big complex ball. The very thing that he was resisting and refusing to see was the simplicity. He just couldn't believe that it was that simple. And yet it is. And yet that is the strange paradox of it. It is really that simple. And then the brain kind of freaks out, like, simple, where is it? Looks all around. It's like, it's right in front of me. Why can't I see it? Calm down. Take a breath. Don't worry. You'll get there. In fact, you're already there. You can't not be there. And that's kind of what's hard to understand about it. So anyway, I was saying, what are some of the things that we can do? What are some of the findings that these novices really found helped them in their transition? And again, these are people who, again, they didn't go and study with a master or somebody like that. They were regular people. They did, were involved in some cases with non-dual workshops and groups, but for the most part, They're regular folk. So one of the things that they found was really useful was, as you might expect, finding moments of stillness and silence throughout your day. And I want to talk about this as finding moments of stillness and silence, and not as meditating, because everybody says to meditate, but nobody really explains why that's so important. And it's important because it gives us a chance to enter into silence and stillness. And when we do that, we have the ability to open up our mind, our heart, our being. And really, in this process, we are getting a taste of, we're descending into this openness that is the essence of non-duality. There are many other things that meditation helps us with, whether for the quest for non-duality or for life in general, but having these moments of silence and stillness, whether it's sitting on a meditation cushion, whether it's walking out in nature, whether it is being still and alone with yourself in a quiet room, sitting, eating a meal, doing something that really allows that openness to arise within you, that is the most important thing. Well, it's one of the important things. There are some other important things that steps that we can take to help open ourselves to this to non-duality. Another one that I found was very interesting, and this one was actually somewhat unexpected. This one I thought was particularly useful for me, as well as I think anybody out there who maybe has trouble asserting themselves. The piece of insight was asserting our energy is really important for non-duality, and what that means is it's about authenticity. It's about basically saying no to people that you don't agree with. It's about drawing our boundaries and saying no, absolutely not, and holding that. If somebody is rude to us, being, not just letting that kind of like bounce off of us or slide and we just kind of duck our heads and go on and say, no, I didn't like that. No, I'm not going to be treated that way. Now, this assertion of energy is actually, it's not necessarily, when you're in a non-dual state, you're always going to act in this way, but it's really important for the transition from separation to non-separation. And the reason that it's so important is that it allows us to be authentic with ourselves. It allows us to be authentic with other people too. And this authenticity is so important because when we have our non-dual insights, our moments of realization, they can be really hard to live out in practice. Remember earlier I was saying that under pressure, under threat, that's when we lose our center and we go back to our old behaviors and old habits. Authenticity, being able to assert our energy or assert our truth is another way of saying it, is going to help us in these moments of threat, in these moments of social pressure, when we're out in public, we're with somebody that we know well that expects us to show up in a very particular kind of personality and persona, to be able to say, no, actually, I've changed. I see the world in a different way. I am not Daniel. I am not this person that you think I am. That authenticity, that ability to assert our truth and our energy in a space is a fundamental skill in order to be able to make the transition into non-duality and make it a functional part of our daily lives, to make it something that we can live by and not just something that we have in a moment when we're by ourselves on retreat on some mountain or in a psychedelic state or on the meditation cushion. We don't want to just have it there and not bring it into the rest of our lives. And asserting our energy, this authenticity, even under pressure, is an essential skill for that. There's one more thing that I want to emphasize that's important for this transition into non-duality, and that is inner work and inner healing. Now, this is something that directly counteracts what I was talking about earlier, spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is the tendency or the desire to reach for spiritual transcendent truth or experience, mystical states, in order to avoid the work of looking at our shadows, looking at our wounds, the part of us that really hurts, the part of us that we, when we were a kid, we took on this sense that I'm not enough, or I'm nobody loves me, nobody will ever love me. These very human, emotional constructs and wounds and beliefs about ourselves or beliefs about the world, that it's all worthless, or that I'm the best, or I'm worthless. We need to heal, and we need to let go of these beliefs, these attachments, this conditioning. Because as we do, it's almost like a hot air balloon where we untie the strings, the ropes on the sandbags, and let them drop. And as we let them drop, the balloon can rise further and further. And so letting go in this kind of way, letting go of these core wounds, allows for the opening to happen naturally, to happen easily, to happen peacefully, to open up, allow us. The process of letting go is not always peaceful. Sometimes it is very painful, which is actually why it is very important to have some kind of You can do this work on your own, but it's really helpful to work with a therapist, to work with somebody who does inner work or inner guidance. And most of the work that I do with people to help them open up to non-duality is I do a lot of spiritual work with people, transcendence, an opening of consciousness, opening of the heart, and yet that is useful work. But the stuff that is really keeping them from opening up and staying open in this space is really a lot of their old conditioning, a lot of old beliefs that we carry around that constrict us, that want to tighten up and protect us, because in the past we were hurt, in the past bad things happened, and so we're afraid of being hurt and feeling pain again. Part of non-duality, part of living in an open and awakened state, is being willing to be crucified at any moment. That is something that came through for me very clearly when I first had my awakening experience, and it is not something that I've been able to live up to every single moment since then, because there are still parts of me that are very scared of that amount of pain, that amount of social vitriol and isolation. And when that comes up, I have to see it, I have to recognize it for what it is, and I have to gently let go, gently bring love and trust, cultivate trust with these parts of me that are very scared. I can feel some of them in my gut down here. Scared of really what it means to live uncompromisingly in the light of truth. And this is not something that happens all at once. And very, very, very few people does it happen all at once for. Maybe one in a generation, maybe a couple. For most of us, it is a long process of letting go, of inner healing, of inner love and inner acceptance. So I want to wrap up this video just with a final point to take away from this gold mine of an article. And again, I'll link it in the description below. One of the people that they interviewed talked about how you have, all you can do to really bring about this non-dual state is you can ripen yourself. You can set up the conditions for it. You can set up, prepare yourself, prepare the conditions for it to happen, but you cannot will it to happen. And I think that's absolutely right. I think the best that we can do is to ripen ourselves. And as the Bhagavad Gita says, to relinquish the fruits of our actions, which essentially just means do the thing that you have to do and let go of the results. The results are not in your control. As much as we'd like to believe that they are, as much as we like to think that they are, in this domain, the results are not in our control. In fact, it is about letting go of control. It is about letting go of our hold on the world, that the real insight and the real opening arrives. So if you are hearing all this, reading all this, and you want to go and do it, the best that I think any of us can do is to do our best, to show up, do what we need in order to open our hearts, to heal ourselves, to assert our energy, to find those moments of stillness and silence. And then, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Live your life. Seek the silence. Find the peace. Find that love for yourself and for those around you. And then the universe will take care of itself.